separation, which is in some ways most similar to apartheid, being that's what it means in Afrikaans, and the rationale for the separation rings most true with the liberal Zionist discourse as opposed to the right Zionist discourse. Okay, so I'm going to give some examples now also from the occupied territories, and I encourage you to bear in mind the examples that you've already seen and described here, and think about how they are similar, in what ways they mirror what is also taking place in the occupied territories as well. So the West Bank and the Gaza Strip has been under Israeli military rule for almost 46 years. If you think about that, I think any Palestinian who's under 50, basically, can only, from the West Bank and Gaza, can only remember Israeli military rule. In East Jerusalem, just looking at that as one specific area, because Israel unilaterally annexed it, so their conditions are a bit different. Palestinian residents face planning restrictions, home demolitions, discrimination in municipal services, and the community shattering apartheid wall. You know, those are, I mean, every single one of those, and there's many more examples of the discriminatory conditions that they face. All of those things, for the sake of space and brevity, I didn't want to throw in loads and loads of statistics, but you can find all the statistics very easily enough about these realities. And one of the kind of oddest, well, I'll just show you this next quotation actually, because it's relevant to what I'm about to say. The current mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, told the BBC in 2011 on the Hard Talk programme, everybody knows that programme, that he seeks to maintain a Jewish majority in the city. Now, it wasn't like something that slipped out, and he was then, you know, a bit sorry for saying that. He was saying, yeah, that's actually, and you know, the presenter was pushing him on this, the interviewer was pushing him on this, and he said, yes, there is a particular ratio of Jews to Palestinians within Jerusalem that I see as, you know, ideal, or I don't want to see that be changed beyond this certain point. Okay, again, think of what the reaction would be if the mayor of any major city, for Israel, Jerusalem is its capital, okay, if any capital city, the mayor of any capital city in the world, said that about an ethnic or religious minority, that there is a certain percentage of proportion of that city that he's not going to allow and doesn't want that ethnic or religious minority to go above. But, bizarrely enough, Nir Barkat also is very keen on talking about how his Jerusalem municipality is non-discriminatory. And Israel's defenders will also talk about, they'll say, well look, the Palestinian proportion of the population in Jerusalem is like 1 in 3, and if they were so intent on removing Palestinians in Jerusalem, how come there's so many still there? Okay? Which is a very, you know, it's a rubbish argument, because the argument should be based on what sort of policies are actually being advanced. And the fact that the Palestinian presence has, you know, remained is a testament to Palestinian tenacity and steadfastness, not to the desire or otherwise of the Jerusalem municipality to remove them. Looking at kind of the bigger picture of East Jerusalem and the West Bank together, you've got 300,000 Israeli citizens now who live in the settlements in the West Bank, all of which are illegal under international law, and you've got another 200,000 or so, like these are both rough figures, in East Jerusalem. So if you take all of the colonies that Israel has built after '67 in defiance of international law, in the occupied territories, you've got about 500,000 citizens living in them. Meanwhile, the Palestinians who live around all these settlements have their freedom of movement controlled and limited by a regime, very complex regime that is developed, that is both bureaucratic in the sense of requiring permits, and the permits having particular conditions, etc., and also, like the bureaucracy part, and also the physical obstacle part of it. Okay, so Israel has also, in a couple of recent years, has trumpeted the fact that a few of the significant manned checkpoints in the West Bank have been removed, or at least the physical presence of soldiers is no longer there, etc., which is true, and which, for the Palestinians who have to use those checkpoints, is obviously beneficial. But in terms of the number of physical obstacles to Palestinian freedom of movement, because you don't need to have soldiers present to stop a car going from A to B, there's about 500 obstacles across the West Bank. And that includes massive piles of rocks and dirt that the Israeli army will put across the road, trenches, metal gates, of course the separation wall itself, So all of these obstacles impede the ability of Palestinian communities to relate naturally to each other, of people to go from one point to another, or of goods to be transported from one place to another, etc., etc. And it either means that a journey is impossible, or requires such a kind of convoluted route that it's not possible, or it's not desirable, etc. And that has been a facet of everyday Palestinian life for such a long time. Mentioned the apartheid wall. Okay, the vast majority of the apartheid wall, which has also been kind of up in some shape or form for about a decade, almost. 700 kilometers in length. It's 70% completed or under construction. Majority of it all lies within occupied territory. And because of that fact, because of the fact that it's been built in territory that the international community considers occupied, that is why the International Court of Justice, sitting at The Hague, that is why in 2004, when they issued their advisory opinion as requested by the General Assembly, that's why they said that in their opinion the wall, insofar as it is in the occupied territory, is illegal. And in fact that ruling, that advisory opinion, which I advise you to look up, like it's okay, it's a bit dense, but they are judges in The Hague, it's very useful because they also comment on the illegality of the settlements, and they go over the kind of grounds for that and so forth. And I put that there as well to show you one example of the way in which Israel is allowed to routinely carry out grave, serious breaches of international law that in the case of other countries are not permitted, or which invoke sanction or some sort of retribution. And on the contrary, in the case of Israel, not only is there a lack of sanction, but there is direct aid and assistance in helping them and shielding them from scrutiny. In 60% of the West Bank, which is referred to as Area C, although that designation, Area C refers to agreements that were established in the Oslo Accords between the PLO, the PA and Israel. That might be changing depending on what the new Israeli government decides to do, which it might annex all of Area C, potentially, that's an option. But so far, within Area C, Palestinians who are under military rule require a permit from the Israeli military to build. Okay, and it could be a house, it could be a shed for the chickens, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Like from small rural farming structures to houses, they need a permit from the Israeli military to build. And if you don't get the permit and then you build anyway, the Israeli army can come along, stick a bit of paper under a rock and say, you've got such and such a point to demolish it, otherwise we're going to come and demolish it for you. A UN report in 2008 said that 94% of all the applications are denied. So again, when they say that all they're doing is enforcing the law, all they're doing is enforcing building regulations, you can see the way in which the cards are stacked deliberately against the Palestinians from the beginning. Okay? It's almost impossible to build, but your family is growing, you need to build, you need to build shelter for your animals, whatever it is. This is a statistic from 2011. Israel demolished 620 Palestinian-owned structures in the West Bank. And the EU talked about that in terms of, quote, the forced transfer of the native population. You might imagine that if one part of your organisation, speaking about the EU, is talking about policies in terms of forced transfer of the native population, you might imagine that that might constitute a breach of human rights, which would mean the EU couldn't carry on with its trade agreement with Israel, which specifically refers to Israel respecting human rights for it to continue. However, I'm sure you'll be surprised to know that the EU does manage to both report on the forced transfer of the native population and continue to maintain its trade agreement at the same time. Human Rights Watch, Israel's regime in the West Bank is a, quote, two-tier system where Palestinians face systematic discrimination. Okay? You could bring in, if it wasn't like a massive waste of paper, you could bring in a huge pile of reports, just like this one produced by Human Rights Watch, or by Amnesty, or by Israeli Palestinian human rights groups, that consistently document and describe the same apartheid reality. Gaza Strip, home to around 1.7 million Palestinians. Most of them are refugees. Okay? Many of those refugees live within a few kilometres from the land that they were expelled from in 1948. The Gaza Strip is fenced in, subject to a blockade that has shifted over the years. If anyone wants to go into detail about that, happy to in the Q&A. The restrictions on movement, actually, you can trace them back to the 90s, when the permit regime first began, a long time before the first rocket. and the siege intensified in 2006, 2007. Still today, a business in Gaza, it's almost impossible for it to export any goods to the West Bank. Its obvious natural destination for goods. Israel still is a signatory to the Oslo Accords, which considers the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as one territorial unit. And until the blockade, the vast majority of all the Gaza Strip's exports went into Israel and the West Bank. Okay? What is the security justification then for Israel preventing exports, preventing someone who makes, I don't know, desks, sending them to the West Bank? Or pens. Why can't they send pens to the West Bank? Well, there is no security justification. It's part of what the Israeli government, the Israeli military authorities themselves have described as a policy of separation between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which has been developed principally as a means of punishing the Gaza Strip while trying to prop up and kind of encourage the rule of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And of course, the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been subjected to numerous massacres and brutal war crimes over the years, the most recent, or most high-profile recent one of which didn't happen so very long ago. And of course, before that, I'm sure many of the people here also remember so-called Operation Cast Lead, the massacre in 2008-2009. And that history goes back. I mean, you go through the 2000s, the decade 2000 onwards, and every year there are war crimes being committed by Israel in Gaza for which there is still continued impunity. I'm going to finish, well, I mean, I'm about to finish totally in a minute, but I'm going to finish this section on specific policies by referring to something that I definitely recommend you look up. Okay, like if I don't see every person writing this down, I trust it's because you've got an amazing memory and that you're just going to remember it anyway. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, right? I know that already sounds exciting, made a report on Israel in March 2012. Okay, this committee, it does a report on